There is a really important stream of thought going on now that narrative power, the power of ideas, the power of common sense is actually one really critical face of power or dimension of power that a lot of organizations for a long time overlooked. But what we know is that the way that people make sense of the world matters, but also that it can change, and that we've been told stories about what is true and what is not, who's deserving and who isn't, about individualism, about meritocracy, and that those stories start to shape what we think is possible. So it's really important for us not to just talk about, what isn't good or what we don't want, but actually to help people imagine what is possible, what they do want.
We have been living through some incredibly difficult times. The last 2.5 years of the COVID crisis, it's wreaked tremendous damage on our communities and sometimes on our families and our souls. But what's important about the COVID crisis is that it was the disease that revealed our illnesses as a society. The underlying racial wealth gap that made some populations very vulnerable to the kind of economic shock, the lack of legal status for some Californians, which meant that they could not access aid, inequalities in education, inequalities in our economy, and even inequalities in our environment and the climate risks that people face. So in the context of these broad divisions, we need to figure out how to move forward. And part of the answer to this in this crisis is a new way of thinking about our economy, which we call solidarity economics. What is solidarity economics all about? Boils down to 3 central messages. The first message, we need to stop talking about the economy and always talk about our economy. When we say the economy, makes it sound like a set of rules given out there by God, nature, or the market, rather than a set of rules that we ourselves put together. And when we say our economy, we see ourselves in it and we see ourselves together. Second, we need to stress that mutuality can actually generate prosperity. Too often, when those of us who are concerned with social justice lift up questions of equity, it is portrayed as though it's a special interest, as though equity is just about justice and inclusion. But we live in a society where inequities are actually quite costly. When you over-incarcerate and over-police, you are terrorizing communities and you are tossing away talent. When you fail to invest in low-income children, particularly low-income children of color, you are starving the ability for productivity in the future. When you leave so many in the shadows by not having comprehensive immigration reform to legalize our undocumented brothers and sisters, you're diminishing the possibility for new small businesses. You're diminishing our economy going forward. We need to own the argument that equity is a way to get to prosperity. It is not a special interest, and that is so important for advocates as they enter into all of the conversations around economic strategy. Third, although it is our economy, and although mutuality will benefit nearly all of us, we need to recognize that some people do benefit from the current set of arrangements. And the only way that we're going to challenge that is to shift power relationships. And what that's going to require is social movements that can bring people together, that can expand circles of belonging, that can bridge across difference, and that can create the opportunity to shift power in a way that's more equitable so we can get an economy, our economy, that is more inclusive. So in this profound moment, the way that some people keep talking about how we need to have an economic recovery is perhaps exactly wrong, because there is no going back to a normal that did not work for so many. Rather than recovery, we need reimagination and restructuring. And solidarity economics is part of the way to get there.
how do we make sure that we're able to empower those voices, especially those who have not traditionally been at the table, or they speak different languages, or they have different lived experiences that doesn't allow them or doesn't encourage them previously to be part of the conversation, to now be involved with this process and truly engage with this process. And so what scares me and what worries me is that if we move forward with this process and don't build in those systems in place, we're actually systemizing and also contributing to the isolation of these voices. So I'm hoping that this SURF process in Los Angeles will allow us the opportunity to break that cycle, to make sure that we're truly engaged with the community members throughout Los Angeles.
One of the most fundamental things that solidarity economics provides us is a reminder that human beings intrinsically desire community, connection, and belonging. And actually, organizing is rooted in the very same belief that people desire these things and want these things. And organizing is actually all about helping people act on these desires for mutuality, for connection.
I think too often, or the traditional notion is that economics and economic development and workforce development, community development are sort of little buckets, siloed buckets of work that don't mix, don't talk to each other, and they are foreign concepts for most individuals. And so when I think of solidarity economics, I think it's a great way and a great tool to share with everybody the notion of a collective sense versus a foreign concept that belongs to somebody or some other entity or somebody else to explain. We're all part of it. I come from immigrant families and farming background family, agri-family, I should say, born to immigrant community. We have a very diverse sort of fabric of individuals and lived experiences in our state. And we also have to be cognizant of those lived experiences and how those individuals are a critical component of the economy and how they too can be part of the conversation. And it is also, so again, it's not a foreign concept, it is a collective concept is when I think of that, and also like meaningful inclusion of all of our diverse populations.
With the solidarity economics frame, what might we see? Well, one, we might see the importance of the caring economy and the fact that those who care for the elderly or home health care or child care services actually employ more people in our economy than all technology services and manufacturing combined. And with our aging population, that's only going to increase. But we'd also see the need to challenge what counts as skilled labor. This is very underpaid labor in our economy, despite the fact that helping a young child be motivated for lifetime learning or to wash an elderly person with dignity is really skilled labor and not rewarded properly. We'd also have to challenge the lack of public funding for child and elder care and advocate for increased funding. With the solidarity economics frame, we might also see the importance of public health rather than simply focusing on treating illness for individuals who are sick. We'd see the value of addressing those social and economic determinants of health in our communities. And we'd also see the need to challenge the power of the medical establishment and the pharmaceutical industry to help focus more resources on public health infrastructure.
So here in our Economic Development Department at the Unity Council, we are really looking through the lens of equity and how every person in our community can participate in the economy. We do that with like this integrated model of, economic development programs that are based on a public health, a permaculture model. We really look at it from a living systems perspective in which everything is interdependent. So we can't do small business programs without also doing food security work and vice versa. And so that's really the model that we try to innovate and iterate, execute, evaluate here at the Unity Council. And it's a model that has worked for over almost 60 years. I think we're 58 years old. We're a place-based organization here in the Fruitvale, and we've been doing this work for a really long time. And we know that development, without displacement really needs like the long game. And everybody on our teams right now are really committed to that.
With a solidarity economics frame and looking at the housing sector, we'd understand that constrained housing supply actually hurts economic growth and spending, as people are spending far too much just on their housing costs without having sufficient resources for other necessary needs. But we'd also see the need to challenge our misdirected housing policies, which provide subsidies to middle and upper income homeowners and underinvest in supporting low-income renters. We'd also have to challenge the not in my backyard NIMBYism that prevents growth of affordable housing in opportunity neighborhoods. With a solidarity economics frame, in the education sector, we might understand better how increasing high school graduation rates actually creates jobs throughout our economy and increases consumer spending. And the fact that our lack of adult education spending undermines innovation and growth. And of course, we'd see the need to challenge not only the underinvestment in the public sector in adult education, but also corporations' lack of investment in training and on-the-job learning to adequate levels. With a solidarity economics frame, we might also understand the importance of our collectively inherited science and technology that's been built up over hundreds of years and should be a collective inheritance of all humankind. And we might also see the importance of our data that's being captured by online platforms and financial services and then resold for private profit rather than collective good. And so as part of that, of course, we'd see the need to challenge that unfair corporate appropriation of those common technological and data resources and figure out how do we restructure our current distorted innovation system that can produce goods and services for the wealthy, but not for those in need. With the solidarity economics frame in relationship to our environment, we might better understand how climate change and pollution are expensive and undermine our economic well-being, and the ways that higher racial disparities in exposure to pollution actually leads to higher exposure for everyone. And we'd see as part of that the need to challenge the unfair gain from using our natural resources and abusing them, and figure out how do we have collective wealth generated from our environment for all. With the solidarity economics frame, we might also see the importance of talking about a social wage rather than a safety net, recognizing the right of everyone to some kind of economic return for the contributions to the economy, to our economy, through unpaid labor, through the appropriation of our collective inheritance inappropriately by private entities, and the use of our collective data. But of course, as part of that, we would need to challenge the blaming narratives of individual responsibility and the paternalistic safety net social programs that we currently have, and need to advocate really for a wealth dividend for all as a form of a guaranteed minimum income.
Working in this space is not easy. It requires commitment and passion and dedication. There are real tensions in income inequality, real tensions in immigration, and sort of political polarization in our community and our society. So I think naming that, recognizing that all of these different things do exist, and facing the challenges head on. That's been our approach. That's my approach. And how do we approach having those conversations that are critical? And by having those uncomfortable conversations and that discomfort, I firmly believe one can get to a place of comfort and a place of at least better understanding so that we can work together toward a shared common goal.
How would we get to this solidarity economics frame being more widespread and accepted across our society? Well, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take difficult conversations across racial differences, across ideological differences, across city and suburb and rural areas. It's going to take investment in that conversation. But we've seen throughout the country and through our previous work that when people come together with that sense of common destiny, that we can overcome these differences. We often talk in this country of talk being cheap because we're more focused on action. But the truth is, talk is not actually cheap. It requires effort. And it can help change hearts and minds in ways that encourage collaboration rather than zero-sum competition.
So for me, the notion of solidarity economics, that we are really looking out for one another, and that the way that we are interacting with one another and organizing with one another changes and influences the way that the system will work. It really is what feels more natural to me and to the people that I organize with. And I think that despite what people have been told and what people believe and what people have experienced, that if they start to participate in a solidarity economic sort of framework, that they will feel like that's more natural as well, that they'll feel like it taps into the best parts of their humanity, and also that they'll feel like this is what they deserve, what their children deserve, what the people that they love deserve, and that they can leave their mark on the future knowing that we've actually changed the way that we are interacting with one another in order to change the systems that hold us all.
Oftentimes what people hear and think is that young people don't care, but in actuality, they are very important roles in their communities and their families. And at the same time, they are one of the most civically engaged generations that we've seen in a long time. And they really care about issues like racial justice. They really care about issues like economic justice. They actually really care about climate. And at the same time, they understand that voting is very critical, but they don't often know how it's done, right? And so a lot of what we do is actually educating young people about the electoral process, and then making sure that they understand by coming together that they can actually build power together, that they're voting on those issues, that they're actually acting on those issues.
Well, I think building an equitable system where the community members and those voices have not been heard before are not only at the table, but really represented in the governance and leadership position is going to be key to making sure that the participation is not just participation, but it's truly engagement. Because in order for us to have those different voices represented, they not only have to be at the table, they have to be speaking, they have to be crafting the message, and as well as our plan moving forward. And that's why our system right now about building the Los Angeles regional partnership is really about making sure that it's not only a system of participation, but making sure that we have a system that will actively promote their voices, especially for those that have not been at the table before.
So to close this, let me just say 3 things. First, we need to, in our work, in our conversations, in the organizing you all be doing as part of the CEMI, or Community Economic Mobilization Initiative, we need to proudly center racial and economic equity. We need to make sure that people understand that it is not a special interest. It should not be an afterthought. It should be at the forefront of our agenda, not just because we care about who's excluded and who needs to be included, but because we profoundly realize that if we center equity, will generate more prosperity for nearly all of us. Second, we need to understand that equity means flipping the script about the story. It means flipping the script about who holds, generates, and interprets data to be able to inform change and determine success. And community organizations need to be at the forefront of this conversation, and y'all have the skills necessary to lead this work. The third thing, expect challenges. We know that there are going to be difficult conversations ahead. These structural inequalities and disadvantages that communities face, they didn't happen by accident. They've been baked in over time. And if we want to change the recipe, we're going to have to scramble a few eggs. And in understanding that, we need to know there'll be conflict, there'll be challenges. Martin Luther King, actually borrowing from someone else, once said that the moral arc may be long, but it bends toward justice. But it's important to realize that someone has to do the bending. And it is the work of community organizations, social movement groups to change the dialogue, change the balance of power and move us to a solidarity economy we can all be proud of.
But we as organizers have to know, we have to believe that something else is possible. If we don't believe, they won't believe. So I just want to remind folks that we can do it and encourage you that in your moments of doubt, that you should look to one another and remind ourselves that actually there's nothing more powerful than the power of people that are collectively working together for good.